There are two main ways that the church or religion in a person or in a group of people gets corrupted. That's what that last reading said. Two ways that a religion goes from being something good and useful to being something twisted and harmful that has lost everything that makes it worthwhile. The passage said that these two forms of messed up religion are represented in the Lord's Word by Babylon and Philistia. We're going to talk about Babylon sometime in the future, but today we're going to continue our series on knowing our spiritual enemies by focusing on the Philistines. First, we'll go through some background on the Philistines, where they lived, who they were, what their spiritual significance is. Next, we'll go through that story that we read in our lessons. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about how to fight against the Philistines. So the Philistines lived in an area southwest of the land of Canaan. If the land of Canaan is sort of here, they were on the coast in the southwest. And southwest symbolizes a place of light, but a place lacking warmth, a place of knowledge lacking love. And it's worth making clear that this sermon is focused on the spiritual symbolism of people who lived in that area long time ago. We're not talking about what's going on in that part of the world right now, except in as much as these issues that we're talking about are universal and, of course, affect the people there as much as they affect the people here. So Philistia was a collection of city-states, each with their own king or ruler. And they had a developed and sophisticated culture with influences from Egypt on the one side and Phoenicia on the other. And like many of the other nations that we've talked about in this series, there's a time at the beginning of the story when the Philistines represented something good. And then there's a long time of them being an enemy to the children of Israel. And then there's some promise in the prophets of a time that they could be beaten down, but then restored to be at peace with the children of Israel in worship to the Lord. When the children of Israel were on their way to the Holy Land from Egypt, it says, "Then it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near," that was the quickest way in, "for God said, lest perhaps the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt." And there's kind of two ways we can see the significance of this. One is that we're not ready to take on the Philistines early in our spiritual lives. And the other is that the Philistines are an enemy that comes with the territory of getting a bit more established in our faith. If we're feeling like we're starting to understand some things about how religious life works and we're getting on that train, well, then we should expect some attacks from the Philistines. The teachings of the new church say that the Philistines symbolize the knowledge of religious concepts. Or, if you prefer older translations, the Philistines symbolize knowledge of the cognitions of faith. If that phrase doesn't immediately mean something to you, you might find it useful to think of the term that Carl Theophilus Odhner, a New Church scholar, used. He says they represent systematic theology. If you think about it, the Egyptians on the one side of them symbolize a more worldly kind of knowledge. And Tyre and Sidon, who are up the coast from them, symbolize the religious knowledges themselves, the concepts, almost like the beautiful raw materials that came from that part of the world, the wood and the other things. Philistia, in between those, represents perhaps those religious raw materials processed, manufactured, stored, organized, systematic theology, well-organized religious concepts. You might think, well, isn't that a good thing? Some of you may have taken some systematic theology courses. Does that make you Philistines? Not necessarily. And in fact, it is a good thing early in the story. Abraham and Isaac spent a lot of time in Philistia, and they made covenants with the Philistines and were blessed by the Lord in that time. Things got more sour toward the end of the relationship. They started stopping up their wells and things. But there was a time when the Philistines were a blessing to them. But the way it works is that when people who are knowledgeable in religious things start to believe that they're better than other people because of the knowledge that they have, then the Philistines have become something corrupt and hellish. It's sometimes called the pride or conceit of self-intelligence. It's an arrogance, a contempt for other people who know less than us, and even a contempt for the Lord, and for people who believe that we actually need to live according to this stuff. No, come on. Join the knowledgeable crowd here. We know better than that. Here's how Secrets of Heaven describes it. It says, "The ancient church used the label of Philistine for all those people who talked and talked about faith and about the idea that salvation is found in faith, and yet completely failed to live a life of faith. For this reason, Philistines, more than any others, were also described as uncircumcised, meaning that they lacked charity. They hadn't done that work to fight against the lusts of the flesh. Philistines in general symbolize the knowledge of religious concepts, and in particular, those who place faith and salvation in knowledge alone, which they turn into memorized information." So those are some ideas about who the Philistines were. Now let's look at that being illustrated in the story that we read. In the first sermon we did in this series some time ago, we read a passage that said that when the children of Israel stopped following the Lord, the nation that attacked them symbolized the exact problem that they were falling into. And we can see that in this story. The children of Israel were fighting the Philistines, and they first lost 4,000 men in one battle. But then they came up with a solution. We'll go get the Ark of the Covenant, and that would save them. And even the Philistines were frightened. But the Philistines strengthened themselves and fought against the children of Israel and killed 30,000 of them. So what was wrong? Why didn't the Ark of the Covenant help them in battle, as it had at Jericho, for example? Well, it's called the Ark of the Covenant, the deal, the agreement between people and God. And if we're not obeying the things written on the tablets inside the ark, we can't be protected by the ark. And the people at the time were worshiping other gods, Baals and Ashtaroths, and their priests, Hophni and Phinehas, were doing all sorts of things that the Lord had explicitly told them not to. And so this is a picture of the evil that the Philistines represent, believing that just having the knowledge, having the ark there, that'll do it, right? I know some stuff. There are the commandments. Save me. No, we have to live according to it. As Secrets of Heaven puts it, neither secular nor religious knowledge means anything to us in the other life, even if we have learned all the secrets that have ever been revealed, unless it permeates our life. And we can see just how absurd and silly this idea is, that we would be saved by knowledge alone, if we imagine it in a different context. Let's imagine that I am someone who knows the most that anyone does in the whole world about football. That's not the case, but let's just imagine it. All the minute details of the rules, all the history of all the players in the games, and all the best offensive and defensive strategies. I've got all that knowledge. And then we're going to play football, you and I. And we go down to the field, and I just stand there. You don't have to be very good to beat me. All you have to do is pick up the ball and actually play football. You run to the end zone. I don't do anything. You score points. You win. I lose. Religious knowledge is the same way. The whole point of it is to be used in playing the game. You're not going to win any games, even if you've got all the knowledge, if you don't ever use it. We have to learn from that religious history. We have to follow the rules of the game. We have to try to employ some of those offensive and defensive strategies in our fights against the hells. That's the only way it makes sense for the Lord to be able to save us through these things, is if we use them. And so the Philistines routed the children of Israel, killed 30,000 of them, and they took the Ark of the Covenant captive and triumphantly placed it in the temple of their god Dagon. But they soon discovered who had the actual power. Now, Dagon was this half-man, half-fish god, kind of like a merman. And he had a human top and then a fish body. And you can almost picture it a little bit like one kid on another kid's shoulders wearing a trench coat pretending to be an adult. Fish represent knowledge. Let's take a bunch of knowledge stuff, and a human represents intelligence. Take some intelligence and some knowledge, mix them together, and then you've got a god worth worshiping. No, you've got some fish and some man parts. It's a powerless idol. It's a chunk of wood or stone or whatever it was made out of. It's not a god, it's a thing. And the Philistines discover just how powerless their god is the next day when they come into the temple. Because what's happened? There's the Ark of the Covenant, and there's Dagon flat on its face in front of the Ark. They stand it back up again, and the next day they come in, and it's flat on its face, and its head has fallen off, and its hands are fallen off. Right. There's no intelligence, there's no power in just a bunch of knowledge and intelligence. Even if you're very smart and very knowledgeable, still no spiritual power in that if we're not living according to it. And on top of that happening to their god, the Philistines also experience various plagues, mice and hemorrhoids and other unpleasant things, and they pass the ark around to different of their cities, saying, "We're done with it, you take it now," and the plagues follow the ark until they finally figure out, "We're going to get rid of this, give it back to the children of Israel." So they've sort of learned their lesson maybe in this story, but what about the children of Israel? Well, Samuel tells them what to do. And it's not complicated what they need to do. You could probably guess, but we'll read it from 1 Samuel chapter 7. And Samuel said to all the house of Israel, saying, "If with all your heart you return to Jehovah and remove the foreign gods from your midst and the Ashtaroth, and prepare your heart for Jehovah and serve him alone, then he will rescue you from the hand of the Philistines." Do they follow the instructions? Yes, they do. And the sons of Israel removed the Baals and the Ashtaroth and served Jehovah alone. And Samuel said, "Bring together all Israel to Mizpah, and I will pray for you unto Jehovah." And they came together toward Mizpah, and drew water and spilled it before Jehovah, and fasted in that day, and said there, "We have sinned against Jehovah." And Samuel judged the sons of Israel in Mizpah. Okay, so they've repented, but what about these Philistines? And it was as Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, and the Philistines approached to battle with Israel, that Jehovah thundered with a great voice on that day against the Philistines, and routed them, and they were stricken before Israel. So they don't even need to fight in the end. Jehovah does it all for them. And this is a theme. So let's talk a bit about how the Lord can help us to fight against the Philistines. Because the Philistines are this powerful and persistent enemy. They kill thousands of children of Israel, including King Saul and Jonathan. But confusingly, they're also often beat very easily. Powerful enemy, beat easily. The giant Goliath with his sword and his spear fell before King David and his sling. 20 Philistines fell before Jonathan and his armor bearer, and then the children of Israel routed the whole army. 600 Philistines fell before the judge Shamgar, and Samson killed thousands of Philistines all by himself. So here are some ideas about how to fight against the Philistines. 3 ideas. First one, you don't need a sword. Second one, don't let them cut your hair. And third, being right might mean being a Philistine. So first, you don't need a sword. One place we might encounter Philistineism is actually through other people. Other people may try to convince us that faith alone saves and that our actions do not matter, and they may be well armed. They may know more passages from the Bible and have better constructed arguments than we can come up with in the moment. They may express disdain for the idea of being saved through the way we actually live our lives. And this is an interesting trait of the Philistines. Certain enemies we've talked about sneak up from behind and attack this way and ambush. The Philistines kind of line up for battle. Here we are. We're strong. We've got a big army. We're coming to take you on. This obvious frontal attack, it's organized, it's well put together, it's a sophisticated argument. And we might feel like to compete with that, we need to arm ourselves with lots of swords and things. But that's going to be hard because at least at one point in the story, the Philistines had all the swords and things. They'd taken all the blacksmiths out of the land of Israel so that they couldn't make swords and spears for the children of Israel. And so the children of Israel had to go down to the coastlands of Philistia to get their farm tools sharpened by the Philistines. But that didn't actually matter because more times than not, people defeated the Philistines without swords and shields and spears. David famously used a sling and a stone to knock down Goliath and then killed him with his own sword. Shamgar used an ox goad, and Samson used the jawbone of a donkey. Listen to what David says to Goliath about the weapons involved in battle. And David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of Jehovah of armies, the God of the battle arrays of Israel, whom you have disdained. This day Jehovah will shut you up into my hand, and I will smite you and remove your head from you. Then all this assembly shall know that Jehovah does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is Jehovah's, and he will give you into our hand." The reason that David was skilled enough with his sling to defeat Goliath was because he'd had plenty of practice defending his sheep. You can imagine that Shamgar, who used an ox goad, probably had plenty of practice dealing with farm animals. We can defeat the Philistines with the same tools we've used in our lives to protect innocence and protect goodness. Someone can make all sorts of arguments, quote all sorts of passages, and we can respond with, "Yes, but in my life I've found that it works better when I follow the Lord. I think I'm supposed to follow the 10 Commandments. All that the Lord has spoken, we will do and hear." Nothing else is needed. You don't need a sword to defeat the Philistines. A second idea to keep in mind is when dealing with spiritual Philistines, don't let them cut your hair. The Philistines, if you remember, had absolutely no power against Samson. He was this massively strong guy who just took them out time and time again, until they used Delilah, the woman he was interested in, to find out where his strength was and then cut his hair. And then they could put out his eyes and chain him up. Hair, as the most external part of a person's body, symbolizes the most external part of the Word, and perhaps also the most external parts of our lives. And so if you're having a religious debate with people, don't let them cut off your connection to the literal sense of the Word and the literal application of ideas from the Word. Yes, there are many things in the Lord's Word that we need to understand in a spiritual way rather than a literal way. But we should still be living according to those things. We shouldn't cut off the connection between that teaching and how we live our lives. Don't let people talk you out of the importance of living according to what the Lord says. Don't let them cut your hair. Finally, here's a common way that the Philistines might attack in your life. Because you might think about it, well, where does this idea of a person's knowledge making them better come up? Well, one place might be in arguments with other people. So let's say you get into an argument with your friend or family member or coworker about something. They say it's this way, you say it's that way. The argument gets a bit heated. You know that you're right, they know that they're right. And then let's say, it doesn't happen this way in real life, but let's say magically it becomes clear that you are actually right and they are actually wrong. Imagine how you would feel in that moment. Imagine what you might say. I told you. I was right and you were wrong. That feels pretty good, doesn't it? But let's time out here, pause. Why do you feel better than that person? Well, duh, because you were right and they were wrong. Better, worse. But so what? You happen to have the more accurate knowledge in that particular moment. That's fine, but it's as much luck as anything else. Doesn't actually mean anything about you and that person in the big scheme, in the spiritual sense. And if you believe that it does make you better, then that's a belief of a Philistine. Doesn't actually matter who has more knowledge. We shouldn't care about who's right, but what is right. And generally, what's right is the Lord, following the Lord. He's got the right thing, not us. And what really matters is how we treat people. Do we treat people in the right way? Even people who happen to be wrong and disagreed with us. Do you treat those people the right way, or do you call them fools and point out how dumb they are? Or perhaps humble yourself and acknowledge, yeah, I'm wrong on a bunch of things too. Let's keep on trying to figure this stuff out. So the Philistines, wrapping this up, were an enemy that the children of Israel dealt with for a long time. It went back and forth as to who was winning the overall war. And likely the war with the Philistines will go on a long time back and forth within you as well. Maybe you're safe today. Maybe you're feeling like, I don't think I'm falling into that Philistine problem much right now. Great. Just keep an eye out for them in the future. Remember that this is one of the two primary ways that hell takes down religion. So it's likely coming for you at some point in your life. Or if you're on the other side of this and you feel like you see Philistines running amok in your life, remember, there's always another battle. You can turn back to the Lord and he will help you. As Samuel said to the people, if with all your heart you return to Jehovah, remove the foreign gods from your midst and the Ashtaroth, and prepare your heart for Jehovah and serve him alone, then he will rescue you from the hand of the Philistines. Amen.